everyone, welcome to Weather Extra. I'm meteorologist Jillian Johnson. It's hard to believe that we're already in the last weekend of April, but the weather across the nation has been very April-like due to all the severe weather that tore across numerous states over the past week, impacting millions of Americans. That's the sound of massive hail beating up communities in the Carolinas last weekend. We kick off Weather Extra by taking a look at all the catastrophic damage that was caused by severe thunderstorms. Baseball to softball size hail blasted out windows, tore down fences, and left yards covered in enough ice to make it look like a blanket of snow had just fallen. Those storms didn't only produce large hail. Wind gusts between 70 to 90 miles per hour were also recorded. The community of Rock Hill, South Carolina was hit the hardest, and residents there are still dealing with the aftermath of those storms. Jason Puckett went out to communities a few days after the storms to see how residents were assessing the damage. Here's what he found in communities hit the hardest.
In the 2 days since severe storms and hail ripped through parts of Rock Hill, the community has been realizing just how much damage there really is.
We came outside where you can see the gutters. It's like somebody took a machine gun and just, just shot up everything.
The side, the tin damage, and the barn in the back, it's dented all up, and it's raining, it's been up.
Area pretty bad. We got like 3 or 4 power lines down in between Oaks and Haynes Street, and we got a big tree stuck in the street that we need to be removed.
Look almost anywhere and you see destroyed cars, broken and boarded windows, trees crushing houses and vehicles, and down power lines.
Somebody compared it to Hugo, but worse in some ways.
Many in the community working to repair damage and clear roads today, but one of the biggest problems still facing hundreds, the lack of electricity.
We've been on the power Saturday.
That means no AC or heat, no refrigeration, for some no cooking either.
With no power, we're not able to open our doors for guests due to a lot of different reasons.
Jan Stevenson runs the Dorothy Day Soup Kitchen.
We normally serve between 100 and 150.
Despite the lack of power and no working kitchen, they were determined to feed the community.
Today, we managed to throw together peanut butter and jelly sandwich bags with chips and homemade cupcakes. And tomorrow, we hope the power will be back on, but I have a plan for tomorrow.
The soup kitchen, just one example. Amidst the destruction, that the community here is focused on helping each other and recovering together.
All I can do is say pray. We check on the neighbors to make sure everybody's good. So.
This year is truly flying by. In the next couple of days, we'll be officially in the month of May. And living in Texas, you know that once the calendar switches over to May, our temperatures begin to heat up. So what do we typically see throughout the month of May? Well, normal highs for the month start out at about 81 degrees and climb up to about 90 by the end of the month. Although our average first 90-degree day typically falls on the 31st, since 2015, we've recorded 90 degrees temperatures much sooner than that. Waco and Temple have not recorded 90 degrees so far this year. The hottest temperature has been 87 degrees. Now, Killeen actually recorded 100 degrees back on February 26, which made Killeen not only the first city in Texas to reach 100 this year, but the first city in the entire country to reach triple digits. As far as our normal lows go for the month, they start out at about 59 and then rise to 68 by the end of the month. Now, as far as records go, the hottest temperature ever recorded in the month of May was 102 degrees. That happened back in 1985 on the 31st. And the coldest temperature ever recorded was 34 degrees, which fell back on May 4th, 2013. Now, what do we typically see in the rain department throughout the month? Well, May is actually the rainiest month for Central Texas, with 4.44 inches of rain falling on average at Waco Regional Airport. The wettest May was back in 1965 when exactly 15 inches fell. Just as you saw, our temperatures warm up significantly throughout the month of May, and before you know it, we'll be dealing with that scorching summer heat. But across the globe, we've been breaking heat records for nearly the past year. Take a look. Across the world, another heat record was broken for the 10th consecutive month. According to Copernicus, the European Union's climate monitoring service, last month was the hottest March on record for our planet. Since June of 2023, monthly average temperatures have been at all-time highs globally. New data showed some of the greatest rises in average temperatures included North America, Central America, parts of South America, and Eastern and Central Europe. And forecasters with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric atmospheric administration say that Americans need to get ready for the heat as it's here to stay looking ahead into the summer. Now, summer does not officially arrive until the solstice on June 20th, but it may be warming up well before that. In fact, NOAA forecasters are predicting an unusually hot summer across most of the country. Warmer than average temperatures are expected to especially hit the Northeast and large parts of the West. And record heat caused record high rates of health emergencies in some parts of the U.S. last year. That's according to a report by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Emergencies associated with record high temperatures can include heat stroke, heat cramps, and sunburns. The CDC says during the warm season last year, heat-related illnesses accounted for a 20% larger share of emergency department visits than they did in the 5 previous seasons. CDC experts warn deaths and illnesses associated with heat exposure are a continuing public health concern as climate change results in longer, hotter, and more frequent episodes of extreme heat. And according to a new study published in the journal Neurology, more than 500,000 stroke deaths worldwide may be linked to our warming temperatures. Researchers from China looked at 3 decades of data on temperatures and strokes from more than 200 countries and territories. They found the number of stroke-related deaths and disabilities attributable to extreme temperatures have been increasing since 1990. In fact, the researchers found more than 500,000 deaths in 2019 have been linked to temperature fluctuations. Most of those deaths were associated with low temperatures. The study authors say men had more strokes related to extreme temperatures than women, but it affected people across all age groups. Throughout the hot summer months, so we're not only dealing with the scorching heat, during the summer it's also a hurricane season for the United States. And it's hard to believe that the start to hurricane season is about a month away. June 1st kicks off the Atlantic hurricane season, and already the forecast is shaping up to be one for the record books. Last week on Weather Extra, we got a quick look at Colorado State University's annual hurricane outlook, and it's packed full of more hurricanes and named storms than any preseason forecast they've ever released. We now turn to First Alert meteorologist Sean Bellafiore for a deeper dive on what forecasters are predicting for this year's season. Sean.
It's hard to believe that the 2024 hurricane season is right around the corner. And if you've been keeping up with the tropical happenings, you may have heard a lot of buzz about potentially a more active hurricane season than even last year, which was pretty active too. This is a name list for this upcoming season, Alberto down to William, and the potential is pretty decently high that we could move on to a supplemental name list. It's only happened two times in history. This would be the third if it happened this hurricane season. 2005 and 2020, we exhausted that name list. And remember, use those Greek alphabet names. Those have since been replaced with actual names. 2 main things are going to drive this hurricane season: a developing La Nina and extremely warm sea surface temperatures across the Atlantic basin. We've been talking a lot about La Nina over the past couple of years because 2020, 21, and 22 all featured La Nina conditions before we switched to an El Nino this past winter. That has peaked though, and we're starting to see the sea surface temperatures, which were warmer than normal, indicating an El Nino, start to cool a little bit. This is the development region for that El Nino or La Nina, and you can see the cooler than normal sea surface temperatures are starting to emerge. Whenever we have a La Nina, that reduces the wind shear across the Atlantic basin. Wind shear is one of the mortal enemies of hurricanes, so a lack of wind shear potentially means stronger storms and a more frequency of those tropical storms and hurricanes. Now, sea surface temperatures need to also be about 80 degrees or above for tropical storm and hurricane development. And notice that already in the main development region, the Caribbean Sea, those sea surface temperatures are already 80 degrees or above, which is a little bit abnormal for this time of year. And in fact, across much of the Atlantic, the sea surface temperatures are much warmer than normal already. And we are not even at the peak of those sea surface temperatures, which will happen in a couple of months. Last year, 2023, 20 named storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 of which major hurricanes. But the newest outlook coming from Colorado State University, they're usually the first ones to put out a reliable hurricane season forecast, calling for 23 named storms, 11 hurricanes, 5 major major hurricanes, but even that 23 named storms could potentially be a little bit too low. We won't have the official forecast, the official preseason outlook from NOAA until just about a week or two before hurricane season begins, but it is expected to be an active season, and we'll of course keep you updated on all the tropical happenings across the Atlantic Basin. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
For centuries, weather has impacted the lives of every single person who has lived on our planet. But how did forecasting the weather even begin? Well, coming up next on Weather Extra, we dive into the history of weather forecasting in this week's Moment of Science. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Weather Extra. From reading the stars to writing model code, weather forecasting has come a long way and still has a ways to go. Dan Smith takes us through more than 2 millennia of meteorology and your Moment of Science.
We've mentioned before that a meteorologist coined the term chaos theory, which kind of gives you an idea of the uphill battle to predict the future of how all the elements intertwine on a local, regional, and global scale. Here's the story of how mankind's ability to forecast the weather has evolved through the centuries. Humans have been curious about the world around them from the start, but our earliest evidence of trying to forecast comes from Babylon in 650 BC. 3 centuries later, Aristotle wrote a paper called Meteorologica. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, the word actually does come from meteors, which really describes atmospheric phenomena and anything falling from the sky, including rain, snow, and ice. In that case, hydrometeors. Anyway, Aristotle had quite a few errors, like thinking rainbows were only made of 3 colors for some reason, not even the primary ones. But a lot of his theories were pretty sound. How tornadoes form, lightning creating thunder, even a spherical Earth was factored in, even if he thought the sun revolved around it. Aristotle's work was the standard for a good millennium and a half until the Renaissance came around and we said, yeah, we should probably expand on this a bit. We had theories, now came measurement. The hygrometer, to measure the humidity of air, was actually invented a full century and a half before the thermometer, which you can thank Galileo for. Another 50 years or so would get us the barometer for atmospheric pressure. Now, keeping track of observations at one point was good, but getting faraway info by horse was a bit of a limiting factor. Enter the electric telegraph, nearly instantaneous data from dots and dashes to make informed guesses based on conditions upwind. 2 Royal Navy officers used that tech to full effect, from record keeping at hundreds of Coast Guard stations to developing the first daily weather charts after the loss of a ship in a storm. Fitzroy called it forecasting the weather. Wonder if it'll catch on. Now, with radio came broadcast, with broadcast came warnings, and with World War II came radar. Tracking rain was more of a nuisance when trying to track planes, but that signal noise became a revelation for forecasting once the war was over. A decade down the line, the space race led to looking at Earth from on high, with the first weather satellite pictures beamed to the surface in 1960. Now, the computer age brought far too many advances to get into right now, and you can make all the be wrong all the time but still keep my job quips you want, but consider this chart. From 1955 to 2015, a 36-hour forecast went from a dartboard throw of 23% to nearly 85%. There's a long way to go, and we'll probably never reach 100, but who knows what the next big leap in weather will bring. For this week's Moment of Science, I'm Dan Smith.
From the beautiful Texas wildflowers to the plants and flowers in your garden to many of the fruits and vegetables we eat, all of these are dependent on pollinating insects. Coming up next on Weather Extra is this week's Degrees of Science. Brady Taylor spoke with an expert from the University of Florida about how important these pollinating insects are and how you can help them in your own backyard. That conversation is coming up when we come back.
Welcome to this week's Degrees of Science. Today we're talking about pollinator gardens, and we're talking to an expert about this, Dr. Rachel Mallinger. She's an entomology professor at the University of Florida. Dr. Mallinger, thanks for joining us. How important are, when we start talking about the insects that are pollinators, how important are those, say, ecologically and economically for us that they do what they do?
Insects are really important ecologically. They help plants reproduce. Pollination is a part of the process by which flowering plants reproduce. So without insect pollinators and without pollination, we wouldn't have a diversity of plants in our environment. And there are other ecological consequences. For example, pollination produces fruits and seeds. And so without those fruits and seeds, birds and mammals wouldn't have food in wild or natural environments. Those are some examples of the ecological consequences. And then economically, we know that insect pollinators pollinate a diversity of crops. About 75% of crops around the world depend on animal pollinators, primarily insects. And this is enormously economically valuable. For example, there was a study in Georgia that estimated that insect pollinators are worth about $350 million per year.
Man, so is it mainly bees that we talk about, or are there other insects that are important in this process?
Right. Bees are really important pollinators. They do tend to be really highly effective, and that is because they actively collect pollen, and they have hairs on their bodies that help them collect that pollen. So they're really good at moving pollen around. Other insects kind of accidentally pick up pollen when they're visiting flowers. Bees are really effective, but they're not the only pollinators. Butterflies also contribute to pollination. Flies contribute to pollination. Wasps contribute quite a bit. And then other insects like beetles even do some pollination. Really, any insect that visits a flower could pollinate by moving that pollen around.
Are we seeing a decrease in the amount of these pollinating insects?
Yeah, there have been some studies that have found a decrease in insects generally, even in areas that are conserved, preservations. And there are other studies that have estimated specifically for bees that about half the species we have information for are declining and about a quarter are imperiled. Not all species are declining. Some seem to do really well in human-managed habitats, but we do have evidence that a number of species are declining. And pollinators that are really specialized, that require very particular resources, or that have a limited range that exist only in a small area to begin with, tend to be more vulnerable.
So what do these pollinators need to help to be healthy, to build up their population?
Pollinators need three main things. They need food, which comes in the form of flowers that provide nectar and pollen. But some pollinators need additional food as well. For example, butterflies in the caterpillar stage, they feed on foliage. So they need host plants that provide that foliage. And then as adults, they feed on nectar from flowers. Additionally, they need nesting resources. Many pollinators nest below ground, so they need ground that is accessible and undisturbed. Other pollinators nest in woody debris or just on plants. And then finally, they need protection from toxins. And they need those food and those nesting resources to be in places where there isn't routine insecticide or pesticide use.
So if someone was interested in making a pollinator garden or getting their garden more adapted for that, what would people need to do to help out with that?
I would say plant flowers and look for native plants. Try to seek out native plant resources, things that might not be sold in the big box stores, but you may have native plant nurseries in your area. Look to provide a diversity of flowers. Different pollinators like different flowers. Some prefer white, some prefer yellow, some prefer blue-purple, and some prefer red flowers. Also have a diversity of shapes. Some pollinators need flat flowers or flowers without long, deep tubes. Others can access resources within those long, deep tubes. So aim for a diversity of flower colors, a diversity of flower shapes, and with an emphasis on native plants.
So you were mentioning bees and wasps as two of the pollinators. What do you say to people that are worried about having bees and wasps possible in their yard to get stung or something like that?
Great question. I think most people, when they have a negative reaction to bees and wasps, they're thinking about honeybees, maybe paper wasps, bees and wasps that have large social colonies. And actually, the majority of bees and wasps are not social. It's just an individual female. She maybe has a nest below ground or in a beetle burrow or a stem. She might only have a dozen offspring in her entire life. And these solitary bees and wasps are not aggressive. And as long as you don't step or put your hand on them, they're not going to bother you.
To hear their full conversation and learn more about pollinator gardens, scan the QR code on your screen to watch on YouTube, or you can go to kwtx.com/degrees of science and find the interview up on our website. Weather Extra will be right back. Welcome back to Weather Extra. A new study found that our warming planet may be burning a hole in the world's wallet. Climate issues are expected to cause a $38 trillion worth of economic damage by the year 2050. If correct, that translates to a roughly 20% fall in global income over the next 26 years. Researchers say extreme weather can get expensive, with damage repair needed after severe flooding and raging wildfires. Other weather-related issues like record-breaking heat waves can result in crop losses and less labor productivity. All of these natural disasters carry a colossal price tag and is literally making the world poorer. Ivan Rodriguez joins us with more from that new study.
Troubling results from a new study published in Nature, saying there is no way to avoid short-term financial pain even if governments ramp up their efforts to tackle the climate crisis now.
The last 7 complete years, the United States has really broken so many different records in terms of weather and climate extremes, with the cost in excess of $1.1 trillion.
The damage to people's homes, the increased cost to grow and transport food, and mental health tolls will be a hit on the economy, close to 19% by 2050. In some instances, those who are contributing to the problem the least will suffer the most.
It's kind of luck of geography in a lot of this, or lack of luck.
The Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia are the regions most likely to see income reductions based on the report.
In some ways, the effects of climate change will likely be larger there, both because of the higher vulnerability in many of these regions, but also because, frankly, they represent gargantuan departures from the conditions that these places are typically used to.
The U.S., a historically large polluter, will see a smaller impact than neighboring countries, but it won't be spared from the effects of a warming planet, especially younger generations.
Disasters, some of which are greatly amplified by climate change, can put the squeeze on housing supplies, making it less affordable.
I'm Ivan Rodriguez reporting.
Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. Hope you enjoy these last few days of April as we get ready to switch over those calendars to May. We'll see you right back here next weekend for another half hour of weather and science. Have a great week.